income targeting. Boom. It's not clear why that's an easier rule than just working the same number of hours, but it's an easy rule, and maybe that's actually making them better off because they don't have to rack their brains up, maybe, whatever. And then the other thing is, which I find a little bit more compelling, is if you're the kind of person that is just like, remember, these people get to work as much as they want. Well, I can tell you how much I want to work on most days. I don't want to work at all. I would be delighted to just sit my feet and read the New York Times until about 2 o'clock most days. And so if that's you and you're in a market where nobody's telling you how long you've got to work, maybe it's good to have a rule of thumb that imposes some discipline on yourself, right? And maybe you're making a trade-off between the desire to just get home and get back to sipping your tea and the desire to make money. And the sipping the tea is a now thing and making money is a later thing because you're not going to get your paycheck till the end of the month. And so you split the difference between the two and you say, okay, I'll just make a certain amount of money, I'll go home. Okay? And we'll talk a lot about these kinds of self-control issues after the first midterm. But it's quite possible that that this income targeting rule, for reasons like this, is actually making these, that it's making them better off, but that it's sort of the best they can come up with, right? That it's making, that they are actually subject to these other constraints, like they have some self-control issues or they have some cognitive limitations, that this is actually utility maximizing for them. But maybe they'd be better off if they did or could obey the standard model. And indeed, Hammer et al. In the taxi driver study find sort of not super conclusive suggestive evidence that with experience, this income targeting goes away, and that more experienced drivers do, in fact, do what the standard model would suggest, and presumably come out better off, at least financially, and in terms of the trade-off between money and work effort. So let me say a couple things about that. One is, and someone's written a book about this, and I can't remember who, but one of the really fun, popular behavioral economics books that you can get on Amazon that's making behavioral economics, that made it the cool thing a year ago and that's making it the passé thing this year, is all about how you can use results from behavioral economics to actually figure out where you're deviating from the standard model and get yourself back to the standard model because you'll be better off if you follow the standard model. Okay, so I think this could be an example of that. Right? If you're a taxi driver, and at first you're like, you can imagine the old, some sitcom of taxi drivers where the old guy says to the new guy, I see your income targeting. Well, you'll learn to follow the standard model one day. So in some sense, it can be a useful rule for like, well, what would actually be, because presumably there are cases where our psychology is working against us. I think perhaps more importantly, though, it can be a useful guide for public policy in a lot of cases. And we're going to talk about this later on, I think just before the second midterm. We're going to talk about, what's it called? I can never remember this. Libertarian paternalism, which is the topic of Cass Sunstein and Dick Taylor's now quite famous book, Nudge, which you may have heard of and which you should definitely read. Which is to sort of say, look, if we find places where people are deviating from the standard model in ways that we could arguably claim make them worse off, maybe we should step in with some public policy and try to find ways to nudge them towards doing a little bit better for themselves, according to their own preferences, right? Not according to our idea of what's better for them, but according to their own idea of what's better for them. Okay. So that's about that. Now, what we're going to talk about now, well, let me stop and ask if there are any questions about that. Normative and positive issues. Yeah.
So I just wondering, what possibility you could just change the reference on and then have people work a lower wage so they land on higher wage, so you essentially get that extra amount.
So you would like to craft public policy that would manipulate K?
Yes. Would that be possible, first of all?
It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure how you do it. You might just make people miserable because then they'd always be falling below their reference point. But I'm not quite sure how you would accomplish it. And it might wind up being heavy-handed. You might find a way to, the thing that Sunstein and Thaler are on about in Nudge is finding ways to nudge people in the direction of what you think is better for them without doing them any harm. So you have to think carefully about how to manipulate people's income target, right? I mean, one way that we've done, I think, quite successfully in this society and in many places, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go off the reservation here and opine rather heavily, but I think that a lot of television manipulates people's reference point for income in ways that are really kind of not very helpful. So that a lot of people, it's amazing. I can dig up this study if you want me to, but there was a survey that came out several years ago that showed that some astounding percentage of the American population, like 50 or higher, believes that they are further up the income distribution than they actually are. Right? So they're comparing themselves to the wrong people. I think that that's partly a product of what we see on television, but I could be wrong. Okay, so where we're going to go from here is actually, it speaks to that and what Andrew was bringing up earlier, which is where do these reference points come from? We said nothing about why the reference point is what it is in any particular case. And this is dramatically important for a couple of reasons that I will talk about somewhere down in here. I can't remember exactly. No, I think actually up in here. So yeah, why do we care about reference point determination? And then we're going to go through a series of 4 different candidates for where the reference point might actually come from in different situations, what might actually determine people's reference point in different models. And we're going to try to coalesce all of that into what is the current sort of state of the art in the behavioral economics of reference-dependent preferences, which is a 2006 paper by Botan Cosetti, who is the other professor who teaches this class, and Matthew Rabin, who is sort of the dean of behavioral economics at UC Berkeley. And they've come up with a really, really interesting model of expectations-based reference points. And that paper is on B-Space. It's not assigned, but it's really interesting. And one of the things I want to say about this Cosetti-Rabin paper is you'll read it and you're highly likely, as I did, to say, oh, too much math. But one of the things that Matthew Rabin is really, really good at that makes reading his papers worthwhile even when there is a lot of math is that every time he states a proposition, our model demonstrates this, he explains in very, very clear English exactly what that proposition means and why. So you don't actually need to understand the math. And I would encourage you to read the paper. It's a great one. I'm going to talk about that paper, and I'm going to use it as an opportunity to talk about our second case of what common-sense mean by rationality, which is rational expectation. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to jump through some of this stuff a little bit more quickly because I need to finish this up today for sure. So where were we? We were here. Why do we care about reference point determination? Well, just to start by giving you a sort of intuitive illustration of why this might matter, just in case these thoughts haven't occurred to you, as they apparently have occurred to some of your classmates, let's just review some of the assumptions that we have quietly made about the reference point. And so we're talking about mugs. R, the reference point, was the immediate status quo consumption. By immediate, I mean like 5 minutes ago you had 3 months, now you have 4, and your reference point is 4. So immediate status quo. What would happen if instead we made some alternative assumption, like say, for example, R is your consumption level prior to the experiment. It doesn't adjust in 5 minutes. So if you came in only 3 months, your reference point is 3 months. What result would we have seen? Well, this is actually very similar to the situation in problem set in 1B of last week's problem set, where Michaela got a mug from what's his name? Jack Nash from Simon Fraser in the mail, and her reference point didn't adjust right away, so it was still free. And what happened was that her buying price was still different from her selling price because buying involved a loss of money, whereas selling involved a gain of money, but there was no difference in how she felt about the mug, right? Selling the mug didn't feel like a loss of mugs, it just felt like giving up a gain. So the endowment effect was less in that case, yeah? What if we made a different assumption, which is that her reference point for mugs and money was based on her expectations for future consumption of mugs and money? So if you then say, what's your buying price, what's your selling price, then we might think that the person does the following intellectual exercise. Well, I think I want to sell this mug, in which case my expectation is to have one mug less and my selling price more in income. And if that becomes your reference point, right, based on expectations, then all of a sudden there's no gain loss utility already at all, because the trade to having the mug, right, if you expect to not sell the mug, then you're going to be at your reference point. If you expect to sell the mug, you're going to be at your reference point, and gain loss utility just drops out of the model completely. And you'll see that in the Kasegi rating paper if you read it. Okay? So if you expect to sell or expect to buy, then the endowment, if that's where your reference point comes from, is based on your expectations, then the endowment effect would potentially go away completely. Okay? So now, why do you think it is that we assume in the mugs and candy bars endowment effect experiments, why do you think it is that we assume that the reference point is immediate status quo consumption? Andrew? Because it fits the data. Because it's the only assumption that makes sense out of what we see. Right? Not only that, but there are versions of this experiment, which I've alluded to, that show that the longer you hold the mug up to a certain point, the stronger the endowment effect gets. So we have good reason to believe, after the fact, that that's what the reference point is. Okay? But it's not obvious that that's what we would have guessed in advance. Okay, then there's the Easterlin paradox. Remember, which is this the paradox that massive gains in per capita income since World War II don't seem to have led to significant increases in people's self-reported happiness level. But the distribution of income within a country does. Where you are in the distribution apparently does. Right? So this is this weird puzzle around how income affects happiness. So to explain the result over time, that these increases over time don't make sense, the typical assumption is that the reference point R is average income for the nation. I'm wanting to explain the part of the Easterlin paradox that's about why where you are in the income distribution matters, even though increases in income over time don't matter. And that's usually explained by saying, well, the reference point is average income for the nation, so if you're above that, you feel happy because that's a gain, and if you're below that, you feel bad because it's a loss, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But what if we instead assumed that your reference point was based on your own expectations for your income as an individual? Right? So if you're expecting to get a raise, or if you're expecting to have the same wage this year, next year as this year, whatever, that as long as your income is the same as what you expected, you're at your reference point. And then if you get news, suddenly I got an unexpected raise, that's great, or if someone unexpectedly robs me, then that's a bummer. But what would we predict in terms of macroeconomics? Well, one prediction would be that inequality wouldn't make people unhappy in the way that it seems to, inequality in the income distribution, and that only surprise recessions would actually cause people a loss in utility, because if you see the recession coming, your expected income goes down, your reference point shifts, and you don't care. Right? Manifestly not true, but it matters a lot what assumption we make about the reference point. One more example, the labor supply thing we've just been talking about, where we sort of say, oh, well, the reference point is the daily income target. Now, as Andrew has already helpfully pointed out, that just pushes the question back, because we still don't know where the income target comes from. But what if we made a completely different assumption? What if we instead assumed that the driver's reference point was actually not any kind of function of their income, but the average daily income of their passengers? Right? Now, by and large, in a lot of service industries, not all, in a lot of service industries, the customers make more than the workers, which is why they get to ride in cabs. In which case, then you might find that drivers are always below their reference point because they're always woefully comparing themselves to their wealthy passengers, right? In which case you wouldn't get this negative labor supply response, and an increase in wage would just make them feel like, yes, I can catch up with my passengers better now, okay? Okay, so just a series of examples based on what we've already looked at as to why it matters, or the ways in which it matters. Ex post, which is bad Latin, it should be a post, but we say ex post to make it match ex ante, which is good Latin. Ex ante means before, ex post doesn't actually mean after, but we use it to mean after. Ex post, the correct assumption in each case typically seems obvious, right, and is probably correct. But, as I've already sort of pointed out, virtually everything seems obvious ex post, so that's not good science. And then, sort of like already I sort of pointed to it, like, well, what would you have guessed in the mug? I think it's actually quite counterintuitive. Ex ante, that giving someone a mug would change the reference point inside 5 minutes. And then there's this sort of larger question, or other, additional question of, even if we know that people are engaged, or we can sort of conclude that people are engaged in some kind of income target, there's another paper in that taxi driver literature by Gary Farber that shows that, indeed, drivers have wildly different income targets, and furthermore, different income targets each day. So now we really don't know what we're talking about mathematically. How would we even write down a model that would define how that income target is generated? We don't know the psychology behind it, and the data is all over the map. So these are big problems. Let me talk about this isn't actually a positive normative breakdown, it's just two different reasons, they're very closely related, why this matters. I've shown you that in the specific case of reference-dependent preferences, you get big variation in the predictions depending on what you assume about the reference point, but I want to convince you that this matters for the larger endeavor of science. Okay? Now, there are probably people in the room who scoff whenever economists refer to economics as a science, and you're welcome to scoff, but don't scoff to me, because how do you know? I think that to the extent that economics isn't a science, it should be and can be, and will be. And so let me speak to that a little bit, using this issue of reference point determination as a case study. Okay? A consistent theory of reference determination is important for two reasons. Positive economic models, right? In any science, you're coming up with theories that should predict what will happen. Okay? Not just they should predict ex ante and not just explain ex post. Okay? Now, I need to make sure that I say what I actually want to say about this. So let me make two comparisons to try to give you a sense of why, in my opinion, it's so important. For us to consider ourselves a valid science with valid theories. An unflattering comparison that I like to make, and I'm sorry if anybody gets their feathers ruffled by this, is everybody familiar with what I mean by evolutionary psychology? So evolutionary psychology is I don't know if I want to call it a branch of academia. I guess it is. It's something that various academics engage in, which is to say, oh, here's a feature of human evolution, usually human evolution. Like, here's an example that popped in my head. Why do women? It turns out that mothers typically carry their babies on the left side. Why is that? Well, evolutionarily, it could be because a baby can then hear the mother's heartbeat, and we know from other evidence that babies find the sound of their mother's heartbeat soothing, right? Oh, now we know something about evolution. Mothers hold their babies on the left side because of some psychological thing, right? Now, for this to be science, you would need to take that theory and predict the next step of human evolution based on that theory. That would be an ex ante prediction. But we can't actually do it. So you can explain anything in evolutionary psychology, right? There's not a hypothesis that it's not doing anybody any good. It's not predicting anything we haven't already observed. It's just a pastime, in my opinion. I'll make another comparison here. which I think is, for my purposes, because as I said on the first day, I also teach in a public policy school. So for me, economics should matter for public policy. I like to compare the relationship between economics and public policy to the relationship between physics and engineering. Okay? Physicists get to sit around theorizing about why things are the way they are, and it's nice when they're right, but they don't lose any money when they're wrong. Engineers need to get the answer right, okay, or the bridge will collapse. I don't know if you know this, but for those of you who've been around the Bay Area for a while, you probably know this. You know, the Oakland Bay Bridge is in two sections, right? One of them is this beautiful double suspension bridge that's really fabulous, and the other is just a really ugly trestle bridge. And in the Loma Prieta earthquake, it was the trestle side that broke. Right? Guess which side was designed by engineers and which side was designed by an architect? The trestle bridge was designed by engineers. And the fabulous, what should be much more famous double suspension bridge on the other side was designed by an architect. And that doesn't prove anything. But it's just the point being, engineers have a lot on the line, right? So physicists may or may not care whether they're right. They might just be willing to sit around theorizing. But engineers need their physics models to be right, at least right enough, as Friedman would put it. Economists have the luxury within academia of just positing various assumptions and then seeing what the results would be. Public policy analysts and policymakers need right answers, right? Or people will get hurt. And so our models need to be usable, right? They need to be correct, but they also need to be complete. They need to predict things that haven't yet happened in order to be actually usable, like people who have a responsibility to make right decisions. So for this reason, it really matters that our models be complete. And not knowing where the reference point comes from or how to model it means that this model, for a lot of purposes, is moribund. It's not really useful, okay? Yet. The second point is very closely related to that, and I've touched on it already. It has to do with the scientific process, right? The problem with evolutionary psychology is that there's no way you can come up with any hypothesis you want, right? And as long as it's internally consistent and makes some sense to a reasonable person, it is completely impossible to falsify because it is not possible to make an ex ante prediction about human evolution and then test it, right? That, in my opinion, just a priori fundamentally disqualifies evolutionary psychology from ever being considered science. Okay? Much of economics, over neoclassical economics, mainstream economics, over the 100 let's say 30 or 40 years that it's been evolving since Marshall and Bell and Jevons, has qualified, I think, as a pseudoscience, and many people claim so. Not for the reason that most people make this claim, which is you just can't model, society that way. It's too complicated. I reject that. I think the reason that most of the history of economics qualifies as a pseudoscience is because economists have simply made assumptions and then predictions and then gone to bed. They haven't actually made predictions and then tested them. Okay? And in fact, in a lot of fields, in macroeconomics, for example, Larry Summers did something really fabulous like 15, 20 years ago, where he said, the data that we have on macroeconomics is so bad that while it's true, right, typically what economists do is they say, here's my model. My model predicts this. And when I take it to the data, I can't reject my hypothesis. Right? The data says, yes, your hypothesis could be correct. And so you go and you say, ooh, publishable paper, I win. Larry Summers showed, he went out, I think what he did, I can't remember exactly, I can't remember the name of the paper, but I'll dig it up if you want. He went and he got all of the hypotheses that have ever been stated by different economists, plus a bunch of really ludicrous ones that he asked his friends to come up with about macroeconomic growth. And he took them all to the same data set, which was the best data set, which is practically the only data set available to macroeconomics, and didn't reject any of them. And he actually demonstrated that if you took the same data set and extended it out over time, in order to be able to reject any of these hypotheses, in order to be able to reject any of these competing hypotheses about where economic growth comes from, you need something like 1,000 years worth of data. Right? Over the course of 1,000 years, economies would have changed so much that the data set would no longer be valid. Right? So we have a big problem with economics of proceeding without actually testing falsifiable predictions of our models. And if you're not making falsifiable predictions and then testing them, you are not engaged in science. Okay? You may be contributing in interesting ways to the process of scientific thought, but you're not doing science. Okay. That's what I want to say about that. Any questions? Yeah.
Why do you say that we can model society? Because
What?
mathematics will progress far enough such that we can model human behavior?
So Andrew's question is, why do I claim that it is possible to model social interactions, economic interactions? Is it because I believe that mathematics will evolve? No, it's because I've seen it work. The model of supply and demand cuts a lot of ice. The law of demand, the demand curves of downward sloping, is largely true. Outside of labor markets and even inside of labor markets, the law of supply, the supply curves are upward sloping, is largely true. And if you take what economists say about what makes for a truly competitive market and find markets that satisfy those conditions, right, that the good be relatively homogeneous, that there be lots of small producers, that there be no barriers to entry and exit, all those other things, and there not be a lot of government intervention, the predictions of them actually work pretty well and have been used successfully in public policy analysis in a lot of ways that matter. Right? All of the deregulation that took place, starting bizarrely enough with Jimmy Carter, who deregulated the trucking industry in the late 1970s, and then the deregulation of the airlines and telephone, all made society radically better off in precisely the way that neoclassical economics predicted. Other questions?